So I want to give you an update on the Christmas food drive that we were going through all throughout the month of November. The other day, we packaged up 50 boxes that are being taken to Robertsdale High School and Elsinore Elementary School. And as we were going through the food drive and we were counting them up, we realized we're getting really close to 1,000. So we said we want to break 1,000. And then we broke 1,000 and said we want to try to break 1,200. Well, I just want us to celebrate this morning that there were 1,283 food items that were donated. Can we just celebrate that for a minute? And that's not patting ourselves on the back. That's all glory to God. Amen. Now, I know what you were what you've been wondering about all morning is not about who's going to be in the top 4 of the college football playoff. You want to know how many items were donated toward Alabama and how many items were donated toward Auburn. So I've got those numbers for you, thanks to Colby and his crew who counted these up. For Alabama, there were 685 food items. For Auburn, there were 598 food items that were donated. However, there's something else. There was some that was donated, $100 cash toward the Alabama side, $245 cash toward the Auburn side. So we've learned 2 things. 1, Auburn fans are more generous. And 2, if you bought only corn and green beans with both amounts of money, the Auburn side would actually have more food items donated. But in a 4th and 31 scenario, the Auburn fans didn't buy that. They bought something else, and a Hail Mary, Alabama won. I'm sorry, it's just the way that it worked out. I've been waiting 2 weeks to make a joke like that, so hopefully you'll show me some grace. No, just all kidding aside, thank you so much for your generosity, and there's going to be at least 50 families blessed, around 35 to 40 families blessed through these food boxes. Some families will receive multiple boxes depending on the size of their families. And our hope and prayer is that this food meets a need that opens the door to meet a spiritual need. And we know it's going to bless them, and hopefully they'll experience the love of God and want to learn more about that if that's something that God's calling them to. So we're starting a new series today called He Shall Be Called. It comes from the text that Weston read to us from Isaiah chapter 9. But before we get there, this comes from Isaiah, who's a prophet, and I think we need to take a minute and just appreciate the prophets for a moment. I don't know if you know what kind of job some of these guys had, but it was not the most enjoyable position on the planet. They were tasked with bringing messages many times of doom and gloom to very rebellious people, a really difficult job, and God loved to use them as an object lesson. Like, for instance, God called Isaiah to walk around prophesying naked for 3 years. Yes, you heard that correctly. He told Jeremiah to hide his underwear under a rock by the Euphrates River. He told Ezekiel to eat a scroll, like an actual scroll. Ezekiel also slept on his side for 390 days. He cooked his food over manure, and he spoke to a valley filled with dead people's bones. And you thought you had a weird job. Balaam rode on a talking donkey, and not the one from the Shrek movie. Hosea named his kids, and I quote, "unloved and not my people." And you thought your family was weird, and you thought your parents messed you up. Imagine being in your room and they call out, "Hey, unloved, come put up your laundry." So I think it's a really difficult task that God has given to these prophets as they're going to be his servants and they're bringing messages. Well, this text that Weston read to us comes from Isaiah. And in Isaiah chapters 7 and 8, it's been a message of doom and gloom. It's a really dark time in the life of God's people. They've gone through a civil war several years before, and they've gone through a series of bad kings. And you've got these 2 different nations, though they're both God's people. You've got the people of Judah that are living rebelliously toward God. They've had a few better kings that has prolonged their life as a kingdom, but then you have the kingdom of Israel, and they've had nothing but a run of bad kings. And in 731 BC, when Isaiah brings the message to us from Isaiah chapter 9, they're less than a decade away from being carried off into Assyrian captivity. It's going to be a message of darkness and gloom. But right here in the middle, God's going to give them this glimmer of hope. He's got a message of hope for them that's going going to give them what they're going to need to endure what's coming. And it's not just a message of hope for them, it's for us as well. So I want to back up to verse 2. Isaiah wrote, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, this light has dawned." What's the light that is dawning? It's what Weston read. It's this child that's going to be born, this son that's going to be given. On him is going to rest the government. He'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there's going to be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. And it's the zeal of the Lord Almighty that will accomplish this. I mean, it's really fascinating when you go back to verse 6 and you think that all of this rests on a little child. How in the world is a baby going to save us? Because he wasn't just a baby. It wasn't just a child. He was a son. And on this son is going to rest the government. That tells us that this son is not just a normal human being. He is the Son of God. He is divine. And everything's going to rest upon him. And then it gives us these 4 names that he's going to be called, and each name has a descriptive, it has an adjective, and then it has a noun, and it tells us what he was going to be like. And then you get to verse 7, and his government will never end. His greatness has no end. He's going to reign on David's throne. That's a promise that goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 3. Do you remember where we've been reading through and we're waiting on the snake crusher to show up, the one who's going to reverse the curse that was given to Adam and Eve of this enmity and hostility as sin enters into the world? Who's the one that's going to undo all of this? Who's going to crush the head of the serpent? It's the one that's going to reign on David's throne, a kingdom that will have no end, a kingdom filled with righteousness and justice forever. That is our hope. That's what we're waiting on. But we live in a time where we no longer have to wait, because that child was born and he grew up as the Messiah and he gave his life on the cross. And those 4 names given to him are just beautiful. For the next 4 weeks, we're going to spend time through the month of December looking at each one of these names. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. It's going to be an awesome discussion and study together. And not just study, but transformational, life-changing understanding and experience of who Jesus actually is. Because we're going to take each one of these names and find in one of the Gospels a story that gives us how Jesus became this name for us. And these are really important names because they're answering 4 really important questions that we all have. Can I trust Jesus' teaching? Yes, because he's your wonderful counselor. Is he really God? Yes, he is the mighty God. Does he even care for me? Yes, he cares for you as an everlasting Father. And can he make peace out of this mess? Oh, yes, because he's the Prince of Peace. Well, I want to start with that first title this morning, Wonderful Counselor. I remember when I was a student at Faulkner University and I was in the Bible program, I had this professor and mentor of mine who I'm so thankful God placed into my life. He's now gone on to be with the Lord. His name was Donnie Hilliard. And Donnie was one of the wisest men I ever met. And wasn't just wise because of his knowledge, but he and his wife just truly loved people. And I remember we're sitting in one of the Bible classes, one of the ministry courses at Faulkner, and Donnie gave us some of the best advice ever given to any person who was going into ministry. He said, one of the first things you need to do when you get into ministry is you need to find someone around you, an older minister who's got some experience about him, and you need to take him to lunch. And you need to ask that individual to be your mentor and to spend time with you. Because there are a lot of things you're going to experience that you're going to have no clue how to handle. And so I did. I took that advice. We moved to Gulf Shores, Alabama, and just up the road was this much, much older youth minister than me. His name is Mark Butts. I'm just kidding. He wasn't that old. Not then anyways, right, Mark? And Mark and I would meet for lunch at what was formerly known as Willie T's, now known as Bird Dog. It was a little sad when they closed down Willie T's because Mark and I spent many, many times there eating lunch, 2.5 hours, talking about life, talking about ministry, talking about the struggles that we were both going through, talking about ideas and how we could better ourselves and we could be better ministers to God's people, sharing the things that we were struggling with, things that we were experiencing in church because we didn't want to burden our wives with everything. We shared a lot with them. And just trying for me to avoid the mistakes that I knew I would make being young and inexperienced. And I said even just the other day, talking about Mark without him even knowing it, that long before he became a licensed professional counselor, he was my counselor and still is to this day. And I thank God for him regularly. And it speaks to the value of having people in our lives that can give us wise counsel. And you know why. Because we make some really foolish decisions, don't we? It's not that we lack knowledge. We have more knowledge available to us than any other society that has ever lived. If you don't know the answer to a question, you pull out your phone, you ask Google, you ask Siri, and the knowledge is there. We have access to more works, more resources, more videos, more podcasts. There is an abundance of information that is out there. We do not lack information. What we lack is application. And that's what wisdom is. Wisdom is not just knowledge, but it's understanding how to apply knowledge. Knowledge is a gathering and a collection of facts. It's what many of you guys and girls are doing as you go to school. You're learning a lot of facts. You're learning a lot of information. But that's not wisdom. Wisdom is taking that knowledge that you gain through life and learning how to rightly apply those facts. And we don't struggle with information, we struggle with application. We struggle with wisdom because we find ourselves being manipulated by our own desires, by our own thoughts. Our mind lies to us. There's things that we think we really, really need. And we've convinced ourselves and our heart is pulling us in that direction, only to find that's actually the worst thing that we needed to do. And our lies to us over and over and over again. And there are things that we know that we should do. We know that they're the right thing to do, yet we don't do them. And there are things that we know we don't need to do, yet we do them. Did you know that vaping and e-cigarettes are filled with some of the most harmful substances ever taken into the body? Yet there's thousands and thousands and millions of people that vape and use e-cigarettes every day. Did you know that high amounts of sugar in your diet can lead to heart disease and diabetes? Yet don't judge me when I get 3 pieces of dessert today, okay? Just being straight up with you. Leave me alone, okay? Especially depending on what I find out after the service is over, okay? Depending on the rankings. Just kidding, I don't care that much. Did you know that there's more credit card debt and consumer debt today than at any other time in history? That the average American household today has roughly $6,000 to $7,000 worth of credit card and consumer debt. Yet there's an Amazon package that'll be delivered in a little while, right? It's not a lack of information. It's not that we don't know. It's that we don't always apply. Because our minds get the best of us. Our hearts get the best of us. It's not that we need knowledge. Knowledge is good. What we need is wisdom. We need someone who can tell us, this is what you need to do. This is what's going on in your life. This is what you are experiencing. We need someone to help us walk and navigate and understand and see clearly all of the situations that we deal with in life, all of the relationship struggles, all of the financial challenges, all of the emotional struggles that we deal with on a regular basis, all of the sins and temptations that we're being tempted with. We need someone who can see those clearly and just tell us what to do, but model for us what to do. And that's where Jesus comes into the picture. Here's our big idea for the day. Jesus is the source of all wisdom, and he will help us make wise decisions. He's the source of all wisdom because he created everything. More about that next week. Because he lived on earth. He knows what we are experiencing, and he knows how to best navigate what we're going through. This morning, I want to think about a story from John chapter 4. If you got your Bible, I'd love for you to turn there. There's not going to be any verses on the screen. Really, I want to just kind of tell you the story, because it's a story that was given for us to be told, not just read. Stories are captivating, aren't they? In John chapter 4, when you first open it up, it says an interesting line in verse 4. It said, Jesus had to go through Samaria. That's a really interesting line because Jesus, as a Jew, you would not expect that to happen. Jews didn't travel through Samaria. It's like Auburn fans not traveling through Tuscaloosa, or Alabama fans not traveling through Auburn. You make your detour around, and it's even more vile than that. It would be like Jews not traveling through Gaza and Hamas right now. There was such hostility, such hatred between the Jews and the Samaritans. There was thousands of years of water underneath that bridge, a long history that dates all the way back to Isaiah chapter 9 and the Assyrians and what would happen to God's people. So when it says Jesus had to go through Samaria, we know that his disciples are thinking we don't need to go through Samaria. But when he gets there, it's noontime, and he's just outside of this little village called Sychar. And it's hot. He's in the middle of the desert. He's thirsty. He's tired a little bit, and it's time to eat. And so he stops at a well, and he sends his disciples on into the village. And about that time, about the middle part of the day, this woman comes to the well by herself, and she's carrying these pots of water. Most likely she's got this stick across her back with these two large water pots on the end of each one, and she's going to get their water for the day. And most of the women in the village had already gone first thing in the morning, because it makes sense to get your water for the day at the very beginning of the day. But that's not what this woman does. She shows up right in the middle of the day. She takes the journey during the hottest part of the day. Why? Because she wants to be alone. And it's not just that she wants to be alone. She's going to be alone. You see, she's been married and divorced 5 times. She's got a bad reputation in town. And here's the thing about it. Here's the most heartbreaking thing about it. She had nothing to do about it. She never walked out the door 5 times. 5 times she was told to leave. 5 times she was rejected. 5 times she was told to pack her belongings and go somewhere else. She had no rights. She couldn't initiate a divorce in this culture. 5 times she had been completely rejected by a man she thought was going to provide for her. And now she's forced to survive. Now she's living with a man that won't even marry her. She's being treated terribly. In fact, I would argue that she's being treated worse than an animal. When an animal becomes useless, you put him out to pasture, don't you? When this woman became useless, she was treated like an old tool, sent away, thrown in the garbage. And here she comes to this well, carrying these water jars and a lifetime of hurt. And she gets to the well, and here's a man standing there, and you can only imagine what's happening in her mind. She's probably got a lot of distrust in men. And this man speaks to her. He says, "Hey, will you give me a drink?" And instantly she throws up a wall. She says, "You're going to ask me, a Jew? Excuse me, you, a Jew, are going to ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink?" She was shocked because 1, men didn't speak to women in public that they weren't married to, and 2, a Jew speaking to a Samaritan, much less a Samaritan woman, blew her mind. And Jesus said, "Woman, if you knew who was asking you for a drink, you would actually ask him for a drink, and he would give you living water to where you will never thirst again." And obviously she's confused because that's a weird statement. Here's a guy at a well who doesn't have a bucket to draw water. He's asking for water. She doesn't expect him to ask her for water, but now all of a sudden he says he has water that she could really use, and if she would drink his water, she'd never be thirsty again, but yet he has no way to draw the water that he's asking for. She's really confused, and you can almost feel her sarcasm that comes out and says, well, hey, if you've got this living water that'll never make me thirsty again, yeah, go ahead and give that water to me. I'd love to not make this journey every day all by myself. And then Jesus does something. He says, go call your husband and come back. Have you ever backed into a really awkward statement and you didn't mean to? Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. If you are a lady and you are pregnant, I will never ask you if you are pregnant, ever. You could be the day away from giving birth, and I'll never ask until you tell me you're pregnant, okay? You could walk into church carrying a baby, and I'm going to say, well, my goodness, I didn't even know, okay? I'm not walking into that one. I put my feet into my mouth on way too many occasions that I didn't intend to. I'm just not going to do that. Jesus did not back in to an awkward conversation. When he said, go call your husband, he intentionally presses in to the most sensitive part of her life. He knew exactly what he was doing when he said, go call your husband. But what's interesting about Jesus is he's not doing that to bring about more pain. He's doing that to get her to admit what's going on in her life. And it's just this reminder for us as we go through this story and as we think about what Jesus is trying to do as the wonderful counselor, is he's trying to get her to recognize some things about herself. Here is a woman that's come to this well, and she's looking for affirmation in life. She's looking for a man that will show her that she's worthy. 5 times she's been rejected by someone who says, you're not good enough. You're garbage, get out of my home. And now the very man she's with won't even give her the dignity of being her 6th husband. And she's just trying to survive. And she's filled with hurt. She's filled with heartbreak. She's filled with anger and frustration. And she's seeking something that nothing in this life can give her except Jesus. Here's a couple thoughts from this story. Number 1, Jesus knows us better than we know ourselves. Psalm 139 verse 1 says, Lord, you have searched me and you know me. It's like in John 4, Jesus was reading this woman's diary. It's like he knew every single bit of pain and heartbreak she had ever experienced in her life up until this point. There's other stories in the Gospels where Jesus will be at somebody's house and he's having dinner with them, like in Luke 7. And here's Simon, and he's sitting there, and there's this woman that comes in, and she's a sinful woman. She's got a bad reputation. She starts washing Jesus' feet with her tears. And Simon starts to think to himself, man, if Jesus were really the Messiah, he'd know what kind of woman this was touching his feet. He's thinking that, and Jesus says, let me ask you a question. And he presses into the very thing that Simon was thinking about. There's times in the Gospels where it talks about the scribes and Pharisees were grumbling and they're thinking to themselves, and Jesus is able to perceive their thoughts. He knew exactly what his disciples and apostles were thinking. He knew their arguments before they had him. He knew that they were prideful and egotistical long before they even voiced it. And he knows everything about me, and he knows everything about you. He knows every source of pain that's within your life. He knows every place of hurt you've ever experienced. He knows every feeling of insecurity and shame and guilt that you will ever experience, because he has searched your heart and he knows you. And yet, even with all of that, he still wants to be in deep relationship with you. Knowing everything that you know about you that most of us don't know about you, Jesus knows every bit of it and still wants to press into a deep relationship with you, because that's how awesome he is. He's a wonderful counselor. He knows us better than we know ourselves, but he knows exactly what it is that we need. This woman was coming to the well needing something. She's carrying these water jars coming because she needs water for the day. But it's more than that. Those water jars were representative of a deeper need. Here's a woman carrying empty jars that are representative of her relational tank. She has emptiness when it comes to relationships. She has very few, if any, friends. She doesn't have any men in her life that she can trust. She is probably turned against God in some capacity, or at least frustrated with him. She's carrying with her all of these dreams and hopes in life that have been squashed. I'm going to guess after at least the third marriage ended that her dreams of a loving, committed marriage went out the door. For marriage number 4, number 5, and now her current situation is just simply about survival. Can I just get through life and make ends meet until this wretched life ends? That's what she's carrying with her in these empty jars of water. Yet Jesus looks at her and says, there is water that I can give to you that will never make you thirsty again. Let me ask you this. What is it that you are searching for? Is there something that you're carrying that you think is going to fill your life and fill those jars of water? Our hearts convince us of things. If I can just purchase this during this Christmas season, then I'm going to be happy, and that's going to fill my life and make me content. If I can just find the right person, then I'm going to be good, and then I'll be truly happy, and then my life will be content. Man, if my kids could ever just understand why it is that I work so much, maybe one day they'll understand, and then my life will be content. If I could just save up enough and feel safe about the future, then everything will be okay. My guess is, in some capacity, many of us in this room this morning and online are carrying around jars that are either empty or not completely filled. And don't miss what Jesus said. He said that those jars will always be empty, because nothing in this life can ever fill us other than Him. He knows what we need. What we need is Him. In 2 Corinthians, there's this story that Paul gives to us where he's got what he calls this thorn in the flesh, and he's pleading to the Lord to take it away. 3 times, he says, the message comes back the same. My grace is sufficient. Whatever it is that you think is going to fill your life up, if it's not the grace of God, if it's not Jesus Christ and His presence in your life, it's going to leave you feeling empty. Because only Jesus can truly fill our life. He knows what we need, and what we need is Him. You see, this woman didn't need a man who would love her. She needed to recognize the God who loved her. And she needed a man who was godly that would love her. Whatever it is that you need to recognize the God who loves you, who wants to fill your life with His goodness and His love and His presence. He knows what you need, and He knows what you need to do. I find it really interesting in this story, there's only one thing that Jesus actually told this woman to do. Aside from possibly saying, give me a drink, which seems to be more of a request. Some translations word it as a question, will you give me something to drink? There's only one statement in the story Jesus makes where He's telling her to do something. Do you know what it is? He said, go call your husband. I find that really interesting based on what He's actually telling her to do. Is He literally saying, go call your husband, come back here, and then we'll finish the conversation. I'll talk with your man, not you. No, that's not what He's saying. That would be insanely disrespectful, and Jesus was not disrespecting this woman. What He's telling her to do by saying, go call your husband, is He's telling her to face what it is that she is ashamed of. He's telling her to face head on what it is that's bringing her the most pain in her life. He wants her to face it head on. This is a woman that for years has been a fighter. I just want to appreciate who she is, because as a woman, when her first marriage ended, that I'm sure she went into with high hopes. He's going to provide for me. We're going to bear children. We're going to live together. Yeah, there's going to be struggles, but we're going to work through it. This is the guy that God has placed into my life, and we're going to make it work. But then it ended. And now she has to survive. And the way that she can survive is by attaching herself to another man. And so she gets married again. This one's going to be different. This one's going to love me for who I am. And he didn't. Sent her down the road. Told her to pack her bags and get out of his house. By the 3rd time, she's jaded, yes? By the third time, she's trying to survive. There's two instincts that kick in whenever you're in a survival mode. You know what they are: fight or flight. She didn't flight, she's a fighter. And we can see that because when Jesus starts to press in a little bit, she starts pressing back. She doesn't step away. She doesn't say, I gotta go. She starts arguing back. You want me to get you water when you don't have a bucket, and now you're going to give me water that you don't have to draw from with a bucket? She's fighting back. She's doing it respectfully, but she's a fighter. And now all of a sudden she's trying to survive, and you can only imagine what her home life is like. But what Jesus is asking her to do by saying, go call your husband, is he's saying, let's stop fighting. You no longer need to fight, you need to surrender. You need to admit the pain that's in your life, surrender it to Jesus, and allow him to bring about the healing that she'd been longing for. You no longer have to fight for affirmation because you have a God who loves you and who approves of you, who's told you how much he loves you. You no longer have to fight to be successful because if you're a child of God, you're going to inherit the world. You no longer have to fight to get someone to show you love. You no longer have to fight to prove your worth at work. You're a child of God. You're a child of the King. We no longer need to fight. Instead, our posture should be surrender. So what is it that you've been fighting against for the last little while? What is it that you've been pushing down the road, keeping people away? Anytime somebody presses in, you throw up a wall, you start to fight a little bit, you flee a little bit because you don't want anybody to press into. Whatever that is, Jesus says surrender it. It's time to tear down the wall, to let him in. No longer running from God, but running to him, saying, Lord, I don't want to do this anymore. I truly want to surrender today. I want to repent of not just the sin in my life, but the feelings of shame, guilt. I want to confess today the things that are truly going on in my life. I want to confess the sweet name of Jesus, the wonderful counselor, who knows me better than I know myself, who knows exactly what I need and knows what I need to do. I want to confess that name today. Be baptized into Christ so that you can be called a child of God. Maybe today you're here and you are a child of God, but you've not truly surrendered those emotions and pains and things that have happened in your past and maybe even are going on in your present. And you're trying to survive and fight through just to get from one day to the next. Jesus says, go all that. Call it to the forefront of not just your mind, but your heart. Not just admit that it's there, but let's do something about it. Today, maybe your response is to finally surrender and say, I need some help. I need some prayers. I need the wonderful counselor, and I need a licensed counselor. I need to deal with the pain that's in my life. We want to help you with all of that. We want to encourage you and pray for you. Our shepherds will be up front and in the back. If you, after the service, want to cross the aisle and speak to somebody and ask them to pray for you, don't walk out today carrying that burden that maybe you carried in here. Walk today leaving filled with God's love, not empty, seeking something this world can't deliver. To close, I want to leave you with this. As you read through this story in John 4, this woman who's just had this stranger press into the most sensitive part of her life runs back into town. And she says, come see a man that told me everything about myself, everything I've ever done. Can you imagine? Can you imagine somebody walking in here and telling everybody everything you've ever done? I'm going to assume that for many of us, we'd go, yeah, I don't think I want that today. Yet for this woman, it was the most exhilarating, exciting story she could ever share. It didn't produce fear, it produced trust, because that's what happens when you truly meet the wonderful counselor. You're no longer afraid of all the things that you've done and have felt. You are willing to turn that into a story to be shared for God's glory, because that's what Jesus and only Jesus can do for you. So if you're ready to take that shame and guilt and fear that's been a part of your story and use it for the glory of God, then come meet a man who can tell you everything you've ever done and everything that you need to do. He's the source of wisdom. He's our wonderful counselor. And now let's stand together.